Hi, lovely ones. We're here again with another spontaneous emergent conversation. And before we delve into that, I invite you to notice that you are a living, breathing animal and pouring as much sensuous attention as possible as you can summon, as you can imagine, through the river of breath that is forming your attention. And each of us remembering, no matter where we are, even if that's in Europe, that where we are is a place that has been deeply, deeply impacted by colonization, whether launching ships to enact that or lands that were invaded and brutalized very recently. And I acknowledge that I am in the sovereign lands of the Gadigal and Bidjigal peoples, not far at all from the original invasion of the First Fleet. And I acknowledge their elders, past and present, and those yet to come, those who are emerging. I acknowledge their science and their governing systems and their ceremony and songlines and old people and dreaming powers and songlines. I acknowledge all of this in the face of colonization, and I acknowledge the survival and thriving of First Nations peoples where I am and all over the world. And I invite my dear friend to also bring that into our being.
Um, I am seated here in the Muanini lands, and I have a deep sense from living in these mountains that what was always will be because they haven't gone anywhere. They are still with us today, walking side by side at all times at once. And I acknowledge all of those people that we call dead that are actually still part of this moment. And thank you for having me here too, Fifi.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited that we could do this. We've
I'm
known each
excited.
other for a long time, but I guess in middle world time, 13 years. I was counting as I went to get my coffee. I was like, when did we meet? And obviously, like sometimes I think back to that time and you and I both have commented how much has happened in that time, like really worlds of things, both in our lives and the world around us, since we connected with each other online. Um, and online connection is a thing you and I both know really well because sometimes that can go into dear friendship. Sometimes people who meet online end up becoming, really, really intimate. So, yeah, I guess I want to talk to you about, yeah, like intimacy. I want to talk to you about all time, whole time,
Mm.
many braids of time. I guess I'm wondering what's on your mind and in your heart today about things like this.
Yeah, we discovered a whole lot of stuff about the property that we didn't previously know consciously. And it's put me in that mindset of just thinking about what else has happened here. Because it was farmland, would you believe? Like even the Darkwood was a pasture at that time, which just that you know how thick
Hmm.
that is out
Hmm.
there. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's got me really thinking about the all times one time
Hmm.
sort of thing. Yeah, that's that's been kicking around in my mind. What's been happening in your situation?
I feel like where I'm at right now is the collapsing in and contracting of different timelines into like a seed. And so I feel the place that I am in creatively, magically, intimately, erotically is this distilled, concentrated seed. And I couldn't tell you exactly what the contents of that was, but I know that I am processing it through writing fiction for the first time in years and years, through writing and reflecting on different points of relationality in my lifetime and how they link to now or even what might become. And I guess the world is in such devastating unrest and calamity again, like like again. Um, and I feel the the kind of what is that? Not necessarily like entropy, but just like almost like both a speeding up and a slowing down at the same time. And I also pay attention to the planets and I'm noticing, Pluto just moved into Aquarius for the next 20 years. Neptune is going to then move into Aries. Uranus is going to move into Gemini. And this is all happening within the period of about 6 months, which is really, I guess, rare in a human timeline. But obviously, the planets have a different kind of sense of that. There's this intergenerational, all of those planets are outer planets, they're intergenerational planets, they link generations. And so they they're showing us something about the nature of this time, the quality of this time, and they're showing us seismic shifts that happened back in World War II, that happened during the French Revolution, so we can peer back to the times that this has happened before. And very interestingly, the last time Uranus was in Gemini was in the 1940s when a lot of the seeds of what I think of as the witchcraft revival, kind of in its second wave, happened. And something that I'm currently reading your The Rag and Bone Man, and something that you created beautifully as a context in the preface of that book is like going back further into the 1800s and thinking about the kind of viscera of that time and how that opened the way for what became a renaissance of witchcraft. And I'm wondering in that all-time one-time scope, what you're seeing and feeling from that point of view, from the visceral point of view, from the social movement point of view, from the undercurrent point of view.
Hmm. It's it's an interesting question and sometimes hard to put words to that sort of thing. But there's definitely something rising that I sense at the moment, and I feel like it's something that it will sound dramatic, I suppose, but then maybe not considering the things that are going on in the world. But I feel that some of the things that I was designed to live through are coming to pass, is the best way that I could put it. Like
Mm,
things that I was meant to be here for and act in some way. And at one level, it's a bit nerve-wracking because I don't know what they are exactly. I don't know what those threads look like in my conscious mind. It's very much coming through my unconscious, this sense of this weaving, swirling process. And there's a lot of energy behind that, a lot of growing power that's coming up from the underworld. And the reason I mentioned the property before is I'm also starting to understand the relationship between that and fire in terms of actual literal fire in the land and the way that it was used by indigenous people and is used today is still in this, it's almost an offering, the burning off process that keeps us safe in the bush without having outrageous bushfires. And I feel this connection because um yeah, I can't go into too much detail about that, but our coven has done some particular work that's put me very in touch with the underworld, and I feel that these threads that I'm feeling coming into being, they're meant to happen. As
mhm.
unpleasant as they may be, they have to happen, actually. I
Yeah,
don't actually think that some of them can be avoided
yeah,
at this point. And, in some ways that's a little disconcerting, but it's also really important. And I, as you know, I'm planning to go to America in April, and there's a lot of sort of questions around that, and
yeah,
a lot of people asking me about how whether I feel safe doing that
mm,
or whatever, and I just absolutely have to go. That's I don't know why, but that's part of my my purpose. And yeah, I don't know what the threads are, but I know that what is happening has to happen because we're not going to get out of the fix that we're in as a species without it. And I feel like you brought up the rag and bone man, and I'm like, I times like treacle, it sort
Hmm.
of as you pour it, one layer goes over the next and they touch each other.
Yeah.
And then I feel that there was an opening then and in the 1940s and again now, which
Yeah.
are touching like treacle.
Yeah. You were saying that these things they have to happen, and it reminded me of how you and I work deeply in traditions that envision and sense and feel time and space and fate moving as like serpents or dragons. And I was just thinking about how in the Wildwood tradition we have this idea of the black serpent with white eyes who comes up from the underworld, and one of her names is literally translated as inevitability, right?
Mm.
So that which is inevitable, fateful, like the distaff of like the spindle, like it's just like there's a collection of dense, heavy threads right now pouring up from the underworld. I'd love to hear more about, so often I've seen you write in this really articulated way about how witchcraft is, such a song or emergence or, from the underworld. And I think that a lot of people reading about witchcraft or like hunting witchcraft or desiring that connection, maybe that's not an articulation they see consciously very much. And and we're talking about it like we're entirely basing ourselves right now in that. So I'm curious if you could speak to that a little and what your current kind of insight into that is, witchcraft as an underworld phenomenon.
Um, well, something that comes up for me recently is a really strong sense that you have to have exceedingly large amount of room inside yourself to invite witchcraft in. And I think that is because the substance of it is so visceral and so underworldly, like it's got a stickiness to it that and unless I've often gone through the idea that there's age groups where it's good to find witchcraft. I don't know if that's true or not, or whether people just whether that's the usual, but there is a yeah, there is a kind of thick quality to the power that comes up during witchcraft work, and that in our tradition there's a silence as well during a lot of those things, which is kind of the speech of the dead, I suppose.
Hmm.
Um, and that power, that's the thing that we're not giving enough space to as a society, that underworld power. Like, if we don't do something about that, we're going to be in really, really big trouble. And I mean, bigger trouble than we even think that we're going to be in. And
Hmm.
I think maybe that's why witchcraft is having such a big resurgence at this time because we're the people that can speak for that power or not speak, as the case may be. The underworldliness of that, I think, is why, there are maybe more of us than there were in the past. Perhaps, I mean, we have no way of knowing that, but
Hmm.
I sense that perhaps there are more witches than there once were, and I think it speaks to that need. It speaks to that there's an anger.
Yeah.
And I felt that recently because we have quite a bad bushfire situation here in Tassie at the moment. And I was trying to feel into what that is calling for. Like, what are those fires calling for from us? And it's something that has its root in the underworld. I don't know if that's because that's where the original caretakers are now, or whether that has always been the case. But the underworld is crying out for something, and if we won't give it, they take it.
Yeah, that's the very nature of this. Yeah, this yeah, hard to describe, right? Like like on like we I think we could both like go into it, but it feels like, yeah, it feels like a deeply seething silence, something that, I like lives within us as much as we could, fall and rise into. Where do I feel that's going? So often I think about, I guess, this concept of shadow stalking in these times, and how in consumerist capitalist culture we either fetishize the other and we turn it into this marketable,
Mm,
like, this is how much this costs, and therefore you can have it. And I think about that in terms of lots of things like sex work and, yeah, magic and art, and people who are parts of those underworld or side world realms often feel a lot of, yeah, like disquiet or concern or rage over that, right? This like way of like commodifying and reducing down into sellable components,
mm,
these primal things.
mm,
I think of the witch, the sex worker, the poet, the artist. We are, often each other. We often are each other. We often replicate as each other. We often become one another in this great orgy of, like, of yearning, longing, and viscera, but also pain. Like,
mm.
Victor Anderson, who was one of the, kind of carriers of what is now called the fairy tradition, he once said that witchcraft begins in human suffering.
Yes. Yeah.
So it comes out of that suffering. But I would also add, and what I think he was also not saying, is that it's suffering that bleeds into longing, and that opens up this space that you're talking about. When that kind of pain and that kind of yearning, there's a space that opens, and it, and
Mm,
it and it releases expectation. It also releases, the need to make something something. It releases the need to oppress, control, and order. And I think that's why people like, I'm just going to invoke him, people like Jordan Peterson are so terrified of the feminine. And, he's made his whole career out of denigrating the feminine and the dark. And, I've watched him talk just to kind of know my enemy. And, and he speaks so strangely in this like really old world idea about things like Tiamat, right? This kind of weird, bizarre thing of like, see, look at all these chaotic, monstrous feminine things that are gonna, if we don't reassert patriarchy and the order of the masculine, we're all gonna die. And I'm like, can't you see that Tiamat is like, like shredding everything because it's needed, and that we all need to be devoured so that something else that is much more harmonious can arise. It's just like, it's so interesting to see the battle, that some of us would even go, oh, look, there's Saint Michael coming down with the sword to the dragon. And certain people would project certain things on that, but you and I might see something much more soft and erotic. So,
mm,
so,
mm.
so I'm curious about, yeah, like what you're talking about things rising up, things kind of that have been pushed down. And yeah, the monstrous, the draconic, the
Mm.
Lilithine, like pouring through.
I think, yeah, I think what you're saying about the commodification is really interesting too, because you get this like the beautiful monstrous kind of thing
Mhm.
where there's like, these people marketing the concept of being a monster that, couldn't be sort of more physically perfect to look at. And not that that necessarily is the only way that we look, though, because as you know, we have all kinds of different faces.
Hmm.
Um, and that's part of being a witch, really, is being able to change your face. But it interests me that the people that are being targeted by this uprising of the right, so-called right, I don't even know
Mm.
if I necessarily want to talk in those terms, but
Yeah.
that power is against women, it's against gay people, it's against trans people, it's
Hmm.
people whose bodies and behavior are considered monstrous and not in the sexy, sellable kind of way, like not in that way, in a way
Yeah.
that makes people very uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
it's meant to be uncomfortable. And I think that's something we've lost a bit during the bid for acceptance for these groups is the idea that, and it comes back to that pain thing you were talking about with witchcraft. Like the monstrous is meant to make you feel a bit uncomfortable, but
Mm-hmm.
it's healthy to be able to sit with feeling uncomfortable without just slaughtering that group,
Mm-hmm.
which was, yeah, something that I talked about in People of the Outside, where I looked a lot at different types of prejudice and where that might come from. And I think it's really deep rooted in the human psyche. Like,
Yeah.
I believe that epigenetic memory is longer than what science can currently prove.
Yeah.
And yeah, anyway, I've gone off on a major tangent there, haven't I?
Please, no, please keep going that way.
I keep tangenting. Okay.
Yeah.
Like I think like even down to the facial shape thing that like has been plastered all over, which is the idea of that particular shape of nose, shape of brow, shape of teeth kind of thing goes back to our, sapiens focused rejection of earlier forms of man, of human persons, creatures that looked like that,
Yeah.
your Neanderthals and whatnot. And I think prejudice is so deep in us like that. I don't think that most people can look at a picture of a reconstructed person from a different species, such as Neanderthals, without thinking that there's something strange, like
Mm.
a Uncanny Valley kind of aspect about their faces. But I've always loved them. I've
Yeah.
always like found as soon as they started reconstructing them, I'm like, oh, you're beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Like absolutely fascinated and loved them from the start. And I think that's part of the appetite for discomfort. There is like witches have an appetite for things that make other people feel uncomfortable. But I think there's a reason for us to be here. I think that, you know, witches are the people that can actually walk people through that
Yes.
discomfort and out the other side and tell them to sit with it and don't just kill people. Like sit with the fact that that makes you uncomfortable. Don't, persecute that group. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually okay to feel a little bit weird about it. You know, people don't have to feel comfortable with trans people either or with any particular thing. Just let them live. Like
Yeah. Just
just
respect, like let's respect each other's dignity. Yeah. And why do we enshrine comfort and understanding? A friend of mine once said that they were kind of letting go of the intervention of understanding. And I was like, yeah, I think Western people, especially people conditioned by the Western ethos, need to let go of this like grasping. I need to understand in order to respect or have compassion. Guess what, darling, sweetie, beloved, you might not ever understand. But to
don't
cultivate in
have
a
to.
space of not understanding, compassion and respect is powerful.
Mm. The amount of people I've had said like cis people that have said to me, "Oh, I respect your life choices, but I could never do what you've done." And I just look at them like, "Are you okay? Like, why do
Yeah.
you actually think you need to understand it? Why do you think you need to relate to it or want to do it yourself to
Mm,
actually have respect?" Like to me, if we could just get rid of that design flaw, that's clearly a design flaw in
yeah.
Sapiens. You know,
Yeah.
we could come along so much quicker, couldn't we? We could evolve into something a little less combative.
Yeah, completely. And I think that's the thing. Like we evolve. There is this like conservative political social idea, I think, of like the upholding of what people think of as tradition and culture with little understanding of how dynamic that has been, of how evolutionarily adaptive that has actually been. And so people in times of stress and conflict and war and poverty, of which there's just been so much because of the top-down bullshit. They, we hold on, right? And it's like, well, that ossified thing that you're holding on to no longer holds the fire of the transmission of tradition any longer. It has become not even a relic. It has become a pale ghost, and it's hungry and it's holding you there. And I think that's also really interesting to jump back to the thing around witches as being shaped in this monstrous other form, this old epigenetic memory. I know that I've spoken about on other podcasts that I've been on how, as well, like more recently, kind of projected onto that unknown shadow is like the shape of the witch's face, the hat that the witches wear. Like a lot of scholars also believe that that comes from deep anti-Semitism in Europe and deep anti-Welshness. And so and so I feel like that continuing prejudice just takes more recent things and adds to it to the point where the witch has become, the witch is so present right now. I mean, I think she always is, but right now she's very present and she is able to wear God, and anything. So she's just this, like, and as I feel that I'm a part of her great body, like I just feel myself behind my own face and many faces, just this like constant Leviathan crawling that is like
Mhm.
and then I've been this, and I've been this, and I've been this, and I've been this. And sometimes I go, who was the witch before empire? Who were we before that? And I think you said something before about witches, we can kind of help guide people through these things. I think we have always been like psychopomps. I think we have always been guides and moving, helping to move spirits, humans, ourselves from this to that, from this to that. But I don't fully know. But there's just such a cauldron and mystery to witches that is deeply, yeah, deeply enchanting and deeply mysterious.
Mm. I agree. I think there's a lot of variety too, because I
Mhm.
had to look at a lot of different cultures around the world and how they viewed sorcerers and people that were kind of witch adjacent. You might
Yeah,
kind of describe them with all the night flights and the turning into animals and all
yeah.
of those. That there's a variety of views. Most, around the world, there's not one view.
Mm.
There's a lot. Culture around the world shapes that. And sometimes people are scared of us. Sometimes they're just healthily wary.
Yes.
Um, you know, but I think that's natural. I mean, we do deal with the underworld and with death and discomfort and all of these sacrificial kind of
Mm.
experiences that look uncomfortable. I don't blame people for being a bit uncomfortable with the idea that
Yeah.
someone might have mark about them
Yeah.
of the underworld and of the dead. Like, I think that kind of makes sense, really, as a human behavior. But that does vary a bit as well. Some cultures have a slightly more positive view, but there's always this darkness affiliated type of sorcerer in pretty much every culture that I've come across so far.
Hmm.
And I think we are. I don't know. I think the witch is potentially some kind of it's only a theory really, but some kind of a response to the hybridity of our species. Like I think we are sapiens, but we're also discovering that we're all these other species as time goes on. We've got 3% Neanderthal, and some of us
Mm.
have, you know, Denisovian and like all these different other things and people we can't even recognize yet in that mixture. And
Mm.
I wonder if the witch is a gift that comes from that hybridity in some way, like a return of the other, a kind of explosion of things that have been buried in us. That's just something that haunts me as a concept. I don't know if it's real or not, but Yeah, it's an idea I've played with, let me put it that way.
Yeah, it definitely has that haunted quality, which makes me want to pay attention to it more. I'm curious
Mm.
about, like, you and I both have
Yeah.
links to traditional folk cultures, and I'm curious as to how that has helped or hindered or enlivened your understanding of the witch or time or sorcery, things like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think when I was younger, I would have played down how much it's helped me as more so than I would today. Looking back on, and I don't know whether this is happening to everyone or whether it's my sort of, the part of my life that I'm at, but I'm doing a lot of going back and sorting through a lot of processing of old experiences and memories and inheritance and everything at the moment. And in that, I'm realizing that I got more than I thought I did.
Hmm.
In a nutshell, I got more than I thought. And I think a lot of the reason that I got more than I thought was that folk practicing current in my family tended to reject education. And so the fact that I had been to university meant that I was pushed back from some of that in Dorset, like in my family environment, when there was so much more that I've had to kind of, go looking for, I
Hmm.
guess, later on. Um, and I think feeling into that the non-intellectual way of learning, the non-verbal way of learning that comes to you through a folk practice, I've started to enliven parts of my own psyche that I might have neglected while I was, at uni and doing all those things. The parts of my, my sort of mammalian brain,
Hmm.
the instinctual parts and everything that have come to life while exploring those practices. I
Yeah.
think I have got a lot out of it, but I didn't know that until recently.
Yeah, I've heard and feel that many people who have these familial cultural links to folk magical practice, often in the face of larger occult movements or witchcraft movements, will downplay it. This is a phenomenon that I know many people have talked to me about. And
Mm.
I think that, yeah, you're totally right. Like as we kind of like flower and realize our greater contexts, we kind of turn back and go, wait a second. And I did the same thing. Like when I was younger, I just took for granted that my grandmother could turn into a tiger and be a medium of spirits, and all the stories that people told me about her, and my grandfather to lesser extents, but specifically her. And then also like sometimes I have to go, oh yeah, that's right. Most Western people aren't raised with a parent, literally my father, saying, oh yeah,
Yeah.
tonight I'm doing this, and then yes, that spirit came to me and comes to this house all the time, and just talking about spirits in this way. I travel regularly to different countries and continents and sit with people who are modern day witches and spirit workers with a variety of cultural backgrounds. And so often I feel like my job has been to be this person who straddles, two, three worlds culturally and is able to go, hey, most of the world still to this day experiences spirits as very matter of fact reality. And like
Mm.
reminding people that it's actually less common for you to be in a society that's like spirits, how stupid. Like most humans on this planet are spirits, matter of fact, that's just a thing that happens. We don't think about it that much. Or yes, that person down the road, they have a lot of specialty with that. Go talk to them. Like that's actually in African nations, in Southeast Asia, throughout rural parts of, Eastern Europe, and even like, down into Spain and Ireland and, South America. Like this is just actually normal. And I feel like and I feel like that was such a gift that I was not even given. I was just there it is. And I feel like that's
Mm.
been a big part of what I've had to offer to the witchcraft world through my work. And it's taken me a long time to like come to that. And like
Mm.
I teach trance possession, and And I remember early on, I was critiqued by a lot of people, especially people who were coming from a more ceremonial occult or like traditional Wiccan background for teaching these skills. Like, and I just have to say I'm still doing it. Like, and I feel, and I've always felt that the teaching of transpossession actually creates, and the practice of transpossession creates a psychic health and harmony in a community that people who are so into this idea of reified individualist existence, where nothing can pass through you and act as you, where we're not even considering the food that we eat, the bacteria, the virus as wandering phenomena that ride us and that we play with. Like when we can remember that we are so permeable and that the moving through us of ancestral spirits, land spirits, gods contributes to the psychic harmony of an entire culture and community. I feel like the loss of transpossession, especially in many Western parts of the world, is part of it contributes greatly to the illnesses that we see moving through. And I think a lot of it has to do with the nature of self, how we
Yeah.
understand and experience self. And this then goes on to rugged individualism, commodification, the downgrading of the value of the worker. Like if we can't understand and experience, maybe more than understand, but experience viscerally that we are part of greater bodies,
Mhm.
to whom we owe our existence and fealty and love and pain, that emotional intimacy is lost a lot of the time, and I see it when I go back to Bali. I see it when I am in other communities, and it deeply concerns me. And so that's why I'm like, this is what I've gotten from my folk culture, this understanding that you can dance and become the ancestors, that they can become you, that they're right there next to you, that we give them offerings every day, as I know you do, and those cultures exist and have existed in what we now think of as Europe, and I think that there's this like almost like quaint, like when I bring this up to people, there's like, oh yeah, how interesting. I'm like, not just interesting, like pretty necessary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's more than interesting. I think, in fact, that there's a lot of disorders and things in our culture that would probably lessen. I won't say disappear, but I'll go
Yeah.
as far as lessen if people were allowed to be in possession and
Yes.
be allowed to receive other people in possession and to let the boundaries of the self expand
Yes.
or become more permeable, because at the moment we're trapped in identity to the extent that people think that if their identity is taken away from them that they will die or
Yes.
something. But we're not an identity though, are we really?
Mm.
Like we're many identities perhaps,
Hmm.
or we're the potential to become things beyond our identity, that fuck with our identity, perhaps
Hmm.
even
Yeah.
at times. And that's actually quite healthy. And I think it comes back to what we were saying about witches in different cultures. I mean, yes, sorcerers have always been suspected, naturally, um, but there's that space as well for that possession, for that ability to take on spirits into your body. I mean, even a well done Ouija board allows a certain amount of possession by the
Hmm.
person whose hand is on the item. Sometimes they don't even remember moving it around. Sometimes someone else was moving it, as you would know because you've written lots of books about it and stuff. There's many layers of possession.
Hmm.
And I think they're also important.
Yeah.
Like if I haven't been possessed by a spirit for a while, I start to get a bit antsy. I
Yes.
start to feel like a energy that there's too much cosmos coming through me.
Hmm.
I've got to actually bring that to someone or to something.
Hmm.
And I think I don't know, like I think as witches we certainly help people deal with the underworld. Like we certainly can help people die. Absolutely we can. And we can help them to let go of other people that have died.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's this whole other thing again that you're talking about from folk. tradition which isn't just witches, it's actually the whole people. And
Yeah,
some of them have more skill at it than others, but still
sure.
everybody is touched by them.
Yeah.
And that's so important and healthy, and yet it's put across as unhealthy. It's put across as being a form of black magic,
Yeah.
by some people.
Yeah, and who is saying that? That's the thing. I'm like, when someone brings up these things to me, I always go, "Who told you that?" And can you tell me a little bit about their worldview? Because I want that person to kind of trace back and think about why that might be cast in that way. And to me, it's not so much a dualistic moralism as we've discussed. It's not that witches are not eruptions and provocateurs and initiators of immense underworldly, poetry, guts, blood, piss, shit, whatever. It's just that, witches are also, I have to say, having met many in my life, witches are among the most integrous, responsible people I've ever met. So,
Oh my God,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Yes. Where else do you find honor in this day and age except
Yeah.
well,
Witches
the
and
word.
artists, witches and artists, really, at the end of the day. And I'm around a lot of artists these days too. And I just am like, if we don't have those people there, reminding the rest of us, and again, I don't want to get too pigeonholed about it because I see it, I'm always moved because I see it in other places too. I go, oh wow, that bishop and what she said to Trump, yes, it was done in a very like almost like gentle way, but this gentle, powerful way. Like I'm here standing in this place. I'm a woman. I'm a bishop in this Episcopalian church, and I'm telling you right now that I can see what you're going to do, and I'm going to reprimand it in the name of the God you say you worship. Like I just see that, so often I'm moved by that kind of candor and like just like that present, I don't know if it's audacity, but like it's like this beautiful like ray of humankind that I think we're taught not to pay attention to, you
Oh
know?
yes, we are.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think if without those people, that I don't think humans stand a chance really without those people. I think we
Yeah.
need them very much.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, like some of the people who I can rely on best are witches.
Mhm.
It's I don't know. I don't know if that's just my own nature finding like or what, but I have found that to be the case. Certainly some people that would also eat the faces of their enemies, like but also with certain bounds of honor around that. And
Yeah.
honor is classed as quite an old-fashioned concept by a lot of Westerners, at
Yeah.
least. But I think it holds in the craft quite strongly. And if you lose that, it's very hard to get that back again.
Yeah, I think the craft is deeply like the ethos of honor and the ethos of like the honor bound kinship. Yeah, I do think that that is present in the craft that I know and love, and I feel like that is like so often what we come back to. We will miss the mark. We will fuck up as humans, but when we have that like honor bound kinship, connection, intimacy as the altar upon which we lay ourselves down and like like bring ourselves back into being. I think that is kind of something that revives us endlessly and certainly revives me. Like when I think about, because there's so much of the way I live my craft is in community, and sometimes I'm just so tired of the machinations of and the kind of foibles of humans. But then I come back to that sacred obligation or that like, and through that I actually find liberation. It's almost like the more I go through the narrow road, the more I go through the eye of the needle, and the only choice is to give, is to be in mutual exchange and reciprocity with kin and community. I actually find that liberating.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely it is. And I think that's on my mind a lot at the moment too, because we're in the middle of our Witches Lent time at the moment,
Hmm.
where, in our tradition, we give something up, of our choice. And I'm feeling at the moment how sacrifice and giving up for others and holding something like that, it's not that you get something back for it exactly, but it is I suppose, a gold for gold, silver for silver kind of situation, in the sense that there's just this richness. And I think
Mm.
maybe that's the liberation that you're talking about there. There's this sense of like having carried a thing successfully for 40 days, you have this new sense of meaningfulness, this sense of enriched reality. And yeah, that feeling, to me, it's about the real, isn't it? Because I've had people in their 70s and their 80s say to me that they've only just realized that they're going to die.
Mm.
Now, I don't know how that is even possible, that a person can get to that part of their life without ever having really thought about the fact they're going to die. But for me, that's fundamental to initiation. That's fundamental to actually adulting at all. Like, if you
Mhm.
don't know you're going to die, how on earth can you give your time responsibly? How do you give your 40 days over to something during which is Lent, unless you know you've only got so many of those days?
Mhm.
And that sort of thing, I think, is something that I look for with witches, to see how much they've been marked by the underworld. Because if you have been, you know about death. You know that you're only here for so long. And to me, that's a gift. It's a complicated gift, but it is definitely one. And I can help other people if they want to talk about it. I can talk
Yeah.
very openly and comfortably about dying
Hmm.
and about other people dying, and just the realness of that, because the spirit world, like coming back to possession, is
Hmm.
right fucking here.
Yeah.
Like, yes, you're surrendering that person's body and this particular experience of them, but
Hmm.
you're not losing contact with them.
Yeah.
In fact, in some ways, they can feel closer afterwards, depending on the circumstance.
Yeah, I know a lot of
But
people in my life have lost someone and they, for various reasons, they often do feel more intimate with them after they've died. Yeah.
and it sounds funny to some people, but I think that's what got me interested in the mediumship thing in this, during spiritualism in the 19th century, because these people lost a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like, statistically, like their children and everything like that were dying at a really, you would lose, I think it was about, three out of every nine children or something like that if you were well off.
Yeah.
Um, and that's before you even start taking into account all the diseases and everything. I think the dead just bubbled up through them. I
Yeah.
don't even necessarily think this was a movement of the human sort. This was a movement of the dead deciding this medium belongs to me now, and everything that went with that, all of the ectoplasm. And
Mm.
I think it happened because it was taken away. I think it was a response to the fact that, like, reason and the rise of the intellectual approach to life had taken away a lot of things in the West. And so it just kind of went boom, 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 and spilt out all over people's, salons and front rooms. I love messy spirituality.
Absolutely. I think that I think that brings me back to like the thing we were talking about the underworld, like, and you just said it really well, I think. Like maybe this was the movement of the dead, not so much of the humans. And I feel like that's again the underworld in action, right? It's like most of the things that are going on really arising and bubbling and writhing and emerging from underworld impulse from these deeper down shapeless nebulous shaping forces to the point where I can't remember where I first came across this, but it's certainly something I've thought about a lot. Like where here in the colonies, like and they're still the colonies, like where people go, oh, let's put a hospital here, and again, it's like not so much, or let's put a cemetery here, and then weirdly, not so weirdly, weirdly with a Y maybe, it links to the fact that the people who you've just stolen this land from, yes, they too would heal here, they too would bury their dead here, or do maybe ceremony with the dead here. And so it becomes this like it we the underworld for me is so much a place of just intrinsic wisdom and surrendering into that wisdom and that rising back with that transmutation. I've recently finally been reading I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but Messier Eliad's like the shamanism book, like this like older anthropological text. Like I found it in Bali when I was recently there, and I was like, I'm gonna finally read this book. And it is actually I could critique it a lot, but there's a collection in it and like a view, a multicultural view of so many things that have been called shamanism by anthropologists, which have been really interesting to read back through, holding that thesis, that other witchcraft writers have held before, and going, look at this, look at how these shamans are made, look at how these spirit workers are made. Ultimately, they're going into the underworld, they're being torn apart, they're being put back together with new power, they're being flayed on the top of the world tree in the stars. Then this familiar comes in, then this bird, grandmother bird goddess carries them over here. And it's distinct. There's lots of distinct things that happen, but there are these substratum commonalities that happen to us all as well. And it just reminds me of like what happened to me when I was quite young in Bali, and the pain of that, and like when I was reading things like this as a teenager, I felt so seen because I was trying to talk to other like witches about it, and they were like, "What are you talking about?" And they would all talk about initiation in terms of these like formal lineages, and I'm like, "Cool, whatever." But like what I'm trying to see if you've had experienced is like this spirit possession, being taken away, being torn apart, like literally, like you have no control of your body anymore. You're throwing up on the floor and you're seeing visions, and they come to pass the next week and your whole family sees it happen to you. Like did that happen to you too? Like, and
Yeah.
and certainly I eventually found those kinds of witches, but I feel like even that, like people who might identify with the witchcraft movement or certain parts of that kind of greater spirituality, I think it's changed a lot, but 25 years ago, you'd be looked at very strangely if you said those things.
And that's important, isn't it, that it's changed in that
Yeah.
time?
Yeah.
Because I think that's something that we're part of as people who have chosen to speak in some form for this. We're also part of the underworld in the same way that, we're part of the witch body as well. We're part
Mhm.
of like that darkness now that has swallowed and reconstituted us. And sometimes the dead speak through us even when, we don't give them permission to. They're just there ready to go
Yeah.
because the underworld is teeming and full of voices, and I think a lot of people are not listening to them anymore, or
Mm.
they want them to come out and be civilized and say civilized things like, when I died, I went towards the light and my grandma was there and blah blah blah. They're not expecting the sort of black corruption of voices that actually comes out from mediums that are being properly written by the dead. It's not that civilized, and I think that's what the underworld's missing. The underworld wants to be able to express its uncivilized qualities more.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, especially if so-called civilization has been like a an iron blanket placed on top of it to keep it, keep it in order. That reminds me of I kind of briefly flitted past it, but this I like when I look at this Saint Michael and the dragon, and I like I see something very different. I don't I know that it can be wielded in certain ways. I've seen images of that where it's actually really racist or it's actually really black and white or it's actually so patriarchal, But then every now and again, I come across one of those images where it's none of those things and it's older and it's erotic. And
Yeah,
I feel like that ecology, that sensuous, living, visceral ecology of the spirits where the light, the radiance of stars pours down into this raging, dreaming cauldron of life and death. There's something that is deeply moving about witnessing that or channeling that or letting that move through you.
absolutely. I like the ones where where the dragon bites back, where he's
Yeah.
got like a little nibble on St. Michael or St. George or whoever. It's usually St. Michael, but yeah, I I enjoy those images.
I like to invite people to turn it upside down too, to like take those images and go, hey, why don't you flip it and just notice what's happening now? It's quite fun. I would love to, I could talk and listen to you for forever. But there's something I like, I'd love to hear you just speak to your, so-called fiction because, I always think this duality of nonfiction fiction is kind of hilarious because sometimes more truths are spoken in fiction. Um, but, having read your evolving body of work, with the Christopher Penrose novels, which have also fatefully shifted because you've fatefully shifted, and this story that's told through your book that's coming out later this year. How is that for you to be like someone who expresses that and then sees that in the world? Like that's as a writer, I know some of how that feels, but I've had no fiction published. So I'm so curious for you, like how that is to have that come through you.
Mm. Um, let's start by saying I look forward to hearing your fiction, by the way. Um, but also, look, I think it's like a mediumship act. It's
Hmm.
like it's very much like going into a trance, but in a kind of ongoing weird way where the evidence of that has been written down and is lolloping out through the world in the form of a book. Um, yes, and I find the more people are reading it, the more it's opening a doorway there too for those other voices to come through. And it feels fateful, the timing this year that it's happening and that it's being published in America too, where, so much is happening in terms of well, I feel that Henry's story in The Rag and Bone Man might not be quite as relevant in all parts of the world, but maybe it belongs in America at the moment, I
Hmm.
feel. Um, but yeah, I don't know. That's the best way I can describe it is to say that it feels like being in the role of a medium. It feels like erupting with voices and yeah, somehow they've been captured, those words.
Yeah, I feel like the deep kind of link I feel with you, many of which are kind of unsaid, but I feel like one of the links I feel with you is that you and I both have this desire and yearning to speak to things we haven't seen or heard or felt spoken to yet. And that drives me and my writing, and I know it drives yours. And I feel like that is mediumship and that is our response to the underworld because we're like, why is this not happening? And when I think about what's happened, my first published book came out in 2009. I think yours was 2013, but it's not like we weren't writing writing and writing and writing the whole way through. And then what I've seen, and then there was a long pause for me, not so much for you because you have just so much fiction and like nonfiction moving through you, which like they mirror each other. But what I've seen in the last 10 years has been really fascinating. I like in the witchcraft and occult world, I sometimes just take a seat back and watch. And it's not like I'm not doing anything. I'm traveling around teaching and I've spent so much more life force doing that maybe than writing in the last 10 years. But I really like watch um what happens. And I'm so curious. Like what I've noticed over the last 10 to 15 years is this like people from different traditions or non-traditions battling with their stuff around authenticity. Battle like what is authentic? What is old? Battling with these notions that are so defined by colonization. And I'm always like, don't let colonization define what is authentic and old.
Mhm.
And I'm so curious what you have observed kind of coming out and vomiting up and like dancing through like I guess the textual cultures of modern occulture and witchcraft in the last decade.
I mean, we're definitely living through a time of pretty immense change on that front, and I almost feel like folkloric witchcraft was the third wave. Like there was sort of your Wicca and
Mhm.
neo-pagan kind of revival where there was a lot of talk in the early days when I was younger about wanting to get rid of any negative like association of witches. Like,
Mm,
you write in or call into the show that said some bad thing about witches and report it because
mm,
pagans are lovely, sort
mm,
of thing. And then I witnessed that sort of be replaced, not replaced, but augmented, I guess, by traditional witchcraft, sort
mhm,
of in the, I guess, in the late 90s kind of
mm,
thing was when I became aware that that existed as a textual reality. And then at some point in the noughties, folkloric witchcraft came along with this idea that you could get at the older current of it without needing to have a lineage passed to you by
mm,
humans.
mm,
And that there, and I think it's I see it as almost a good third road in a sense that, it kind of gets rid of some of the artifice that can exist in both of those other camps of
yeah.
like the we're so light, we're so dark kind of thing. Folkloric witchcraft just seems to sort of absorb, you know, a bit of both. But yeah, I don't know. As somebody writing, I feel that there's definitely more of a space to say uncomfortable things now. Like, I think that people don't seem to hate me for writing a book on cannibalism. Like, that went
Mm.
down okay. I did have one sort of slightly hostile interview, which I never bothered to look for again after that. But really, no one was bothered. Whereas I think
Yeah.
they would have been intensely bothered if I'd written that in the 90s.
Oh, absolutely. That would have I kind of want to time travel back and see that because that would be really fun to witness now from the vantage. But yeah, I guess I've also noticed like yeah that with the articulation of what we call folkloric witchcrafts, like I feel like that has become a plane of conversation in which we can actually talk about culture and colonization a lot more accurately. Um,
Yes.
because obviously folk cultures adapt and evolve and move through and are carried by colonization. So we can talk about this more on a more real plane. And I think we have more understanding now of the levels of agency that empire affords you. And now that we have in the media platforms for stories and TV series and films and books that tells, there's a plethora of stuff going on right now where people like, all kinds of people who have been relegated to the too hard, we can't think about you pile are now the main storytellers to the point where the conservative forces are like too woke, everything's too woke. I can't handle one more disabled person, sex worker, fat person, indigenous person, trans person expressing anything about their reality. I can't handle it. And it's and it's like, wow, this has been going on for 5 minutes and you've had the floor for 1,000 years and you can't handle it. Wow. Snowflake much. So it's just like fascinating the stories that I get now, you know? And I know that I get those stories because I look for them and I'm in those communities. And I know there's people out there who, even though these stories are on Netflix and Stan and whatever, are like not watching them. But I know also that the conversation gets to them because they get so annoyed. And I feel like
They-
I feel like this is part of I think this is part of the witching too. I feel like this is a result of a lot of witching as well. And I'm just like, wow, this is a fascinating time to be alive. It's also, depending on where you are, a horrible time to be alive. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
It's the case for every era in history. At some
yeah,
level, I would imagine that there's terrible places to be alive and better places.
yeah,
It's just part of the strange nature of reality.
that's true. That's
Uh,
really true.
But yeah, but I don't know. I feel that like I really went for it with the Rag and Bone Man. I mean, Henry is same-sex attracted, but he's also neurodivergent and all
Hmm.
kinds of other like strange things that we wouldn't have even had a pleasant word for 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the very fact that we can talk about neurodivergence as like a divergent thing rather than a disease is probably a great step as well. And there's all these little, niche groups and stuff that open up around this kind of thing, and I love it. I actually love the fact that my differences have a place in the world.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they are meant to be slightly uncomfortable, aren't they? Like, I think, the speaking voice in the Rag and Bone Man does make people slightly uncomfortable, which is what's, I think, great about it.
Yeah, I feel deeply almost swaddled by it.
Yeah.
When I'm reading this book, which I'm nearly finished, this manuscript that I'm reading of yours, I just feel like I just like, maybe a few hours go by, or maybe in the case of this week, a few days, and I come back to it and I'm like, oh, I feel so swaddled, and not in a oppressive way, but I held in this. And there are certain characters in this book that I just go, I see myself in you, or I see this person I love so much in you. And also, it's telling a story of a particular time in a particular place, which is also wildly. I can't remember who said this about art, but the more specific one becomes, the more universal it becomes. So when we speak specifically about our experience, there's something about that allows the human spirit to be held by that.
Mm, I agree.
And you've done that, that's what you've done. That's what you're doing. And that's what I so love about the cornucopia of work that spills forth from you is it's like textural, detailed specificity. It's like guts and viscera because it's like there's just not many people like you're kind of like so unique in that way because there's just not many people who I come across who can make me feel, yeah, I don't know what the word is. Just even in the preface of that book, the way you write about spiritualism, it's like I've never seen this before, and I read a lot. So I'm just like it's like very yeah, you're working magic as you write really really powerfully, and it's that maybe that part isn't unique, but your style of doing it really speaks to me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Means a great deal to me.
Okay, lovely one. Well, this has been rich. Is there anything you would like to end with or open with?
No, I think we said it all.
Okay, great, 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 great. Well, I love the color of the curtains behind you. So thanks for those red curtains holding you and the light pouring upon you. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. And if you have any questions for us, you can write them, below, and maybe we'll see them and write back. Bye, lovelies.